let's talk about Joppa stream from yesterday. So we had about a 3-hour stream yesterday. The beginning of the stream, not much going on there. He talked a little bit about the fog again. The fog, is still a topic of discussion where it's too foggy sometimes, and et cetera, et cetera. They're still working on it, is the idea there. Around the 17-minute mark, we talked about the server merger discussion again. So more about the server mergers. This time, Joppa had a little bit more information, but there was still a little bit of, I want to call it confusion, but it's not really confusion. The term that Joppa kept using was servers, when in fact what he was talking about were shards. And there was like the people in the chat were kind of like, hey, you're talking about shards, not servers. But anyway, I'm going to give you the information real quick. So the idea is that they do want to have dynamic scaling on the servers. So basically, it will, when there's too many players, it will open up a new shard. When there are too few of players, it will start to close shards off. And basically, it'll say, hey, this shard is closing. So it'll give some sort of warning. Maybe it'd be 30 minutes, an hour. They said they can dial it in relatively easily and, have it a set number of players. And when that set number of players hits, it basically shuts down the shard and it closes that. And then it does something with merging the people to other shards. There is a possibility of eventually going to picks or layers. So picks were in EverQuest 1, layers were something in World of Warcraft, and then other games have different variations of this. So the idea is to get rid of shards eventually completely and then have layers so that each zone will have its own instance. And then you can go from one version of that zone to a different version of that zone, all on the same server. That is the idea, to eventually do that. There was also talk of a fresh start server. I don't think this is a good idea. I don't know why they were even talking about it, but they are talking about a fresh start server for early access. So that's an idea that is going about. There was not a lot of detail there. There was talk a little bit at the end of all of this about server mergers, because they do realize that some populations of some servers are very, very low. In fact, I know of some servers that have no more than about 10 or so players on the entirety of the server. And I'm not talking about at one time. I'm talking about ever playing on that server. Those servers can have up to 0 people on the server at certain times of the day, which is very, very bad. At 1.0 launch, Joppa did talk about the max capacity of a server, and right now they're looking at about 2,500 to 3,500, but that number may change. They can actually have more than that if they want to. So it's just, we'll have to see once the content is all in and where they're at. So that is talking about the server merge, and we're going to move on. Starting about the 35-minute mark, Joppa goes over the new patch notes. We will be covering the patch notes on a different video, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. But if you want to go and see what Joppa's thoughts are on the patch notes, it starts around the 35-minute mark, and it runs for about 30-ish minutes that he talks about that and breaks it up a little bit with a few other things here and there, and we're going to talk about those. So around the 47-minute mark, added a notification when you gain a skill based on your weapon. So if you don't know, sometimes when you rank up your main weapon, you will get a new skill over here. And some of these skills, you don't know that you're getting them. They just kind of appear. And it does say in the chat down here when that happens. But now it's going to be like a notification across the top of your screen. So that's kind of neat that they do that. Tested some changes to the Cleric shielding. So in the patch notes, there was some Cleric shielding changes. And there's a couple things that I wanted to go over here. So in the patch notes, it talks about Cleric shielding. If you have a shield from a Cleric, you still gain readiness when you are hit, especially good for a tank. So I'm very happy for that change. However, some people brought up that damage shields do not work while you are shielded. Joppa then went and tested that as well. And in fact, it does not give you the damage shield when you have a bubble or a shield from the Cleric. Joppa did say that he likes that, and it seems like at this point it's going to stay in the game. I disagree with that, but again, I'm not the developer of the game. I think that takes away from having a summoner Cleric combo in your group, because it basically makes a druid or a shaman a better healer with a summoner. Some people will say, well, that's a good thing. It adds class diversity, etc. But I think personally that it just takes away from the Cleric more than it gives to the others, is kind of the way that I look at it. Anyway, you can debate on that all you want. Shaman changes. So he got down to the shaman changes. This is another notable part of the going over the patch notes. He basically said, yes, shamans were nerfed. They did remove some of the haste attributes. So basically, shaman haste was 20%. It is now down to starting at 10%. It goes up to, I think, 12 and then 16 or something along those lines is what it ends up being. So you do get a bit of a nerf to the haste. And that's because Joppa feels like haste is a very sought after stat for pretty much everyone, especially for melee DPS classes. And we're going to talk more about haste later on because there's a lot of changes that he's looking at for haste. Let's see. Discussion about removing technique utility bars and just having 2 bars. So around the 1 hour, 5 minute mark, they did discuss about these bars down here. So all of your different bars and saying, instead of having 3 separate bars, having 2 separate bars and basically just having 2 bars that are like this down here. And then you could put whatever you want into it. He did say that there probably will be limits to that. They will probably still limit it at 4 techniques and 6 utility, but you can put them anywhere you want on your 2 separate bars. That is the idea. Some people were trying to, talk about that a little bit. Didn't really get anywhere, but that's ultimately what they're thinking about doing or looking at possibly doing in the future. Testing with harm shield reflect issue. So right now, if you don't know, there is an issue with harm shield being able to reflect to pressure plate and then pressure plate reflecting back to harm shield and back and forth. This also works on the Lycan that is over in EP, the Witch. There's a reflect ability that happens there. And effectively what happens is when both of those abilities are up at the same time, damage reflects like instantly, very, 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 very fast, and it will kill one of the 2 different people involved in that almost instantaneously. It's like an unlimited amount of damage that just goes back and forth. He's looking at getting that fixed. It is kind of a problem. Next up, at the hour 18-minute mark, shield discussion. So he's talking about, people have basically brought up, hey, once you get into the warriors and paladins, what kind of abilities are we looking at to get for those 2 classes with the shield? Because he did mention previously that the shield would be something that they want to add more to and give those 2 classes more things to do with their shield. So during the shield discussion, a shield throw came up, being able to toss your shield and bring it back, very much Captain America style. That is an idea and probably will be in the game. Auto attack with the shield bash like monks. So monks right now have a proc that goes off at elbow strike or wheel kick based on their auto attack. So as they're auto attacking, it randomly procs this elbow kick and elbow strike and wheel kick. There might be something to do with warriors or paladins. Similar thing when they are having sword shield combo. They might automatically bash with their shield as a proc. The next one would be a shield bash or charge type ability where they lower their shield and bash into the enemy. Excuse me. That's another one that they are looking at. So that might come in. When he got to the current channeling mechanics, somebody asked him about the channeling and haste. Again, these are all things that go together. Haste right now messes with channeling very badly. And he basically said that, the current channeling mechanic is beep. I will let you fill in the blank there. He said, it looked like he said dog and poop, but who knows? He beeped it out and it was, a little funny moment. Cleric, Druid, AC, HP buffs will not stack. So the Cleric is getting an HP AC buff addition or change. Right now we have like the Awaken line, and that's going to be, I think, 4 or 5 different spells now. So it's going to be a broader range of spells that you're going to get as you level up. The highest one being, I think, 40 AC and 220 HP. The Druid will also be getting an HP AC buff. But once the Druid comes in, those 2 buffs will not stack. The Druid version will be a lesser version of the Cleric version of the same level. The Cleric version will overwrite the Druid version. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to do that, because if the Cleric version is the better version, if the Druid version is the better, higher level version, will a lower level Cleric version overwrite that? I don't know. But anyway, the idea is that the higher, better one will overwrite the other one, which effectively will make the Cleric one overwrite the Druid one, assuming same level. Let's see. Interrupt off of global cooldown. That is the idea going forward, is to take interrupt off of global cooldown, especially when you're talking about tanks and their shield bashing and stuff. So that would be a very nice change, so that we don't have to wait the 1.5 global cooldown. We can just, as soon as we see it, interrupt it. The reason for that is because certain interrupts need to happen very, very fast. I don't know if you guys have fought some of these mobs, but there are mobs in the game that can get the spell casting increase modifier, and it gets their some of their actions that you have to interrupt in like 1 second, and that is not enough time usually for some people, like the enchanter, for example, who has a 1 second cast time. It's very hard for them to get off an interrupt when there's a 1 second cast time and a 1 second ability time. Kind of tough to do that. So anyway, he's looking at doing interrupts off of global cooldown for that reason. Casting distance, charge, discussion, all of that stuff that has been coming in from one of the patches, like 2 patches ago. They kind of fixed some of it in the recent patch. They're still looking at that and trying to adjust some of that going forward. And that discussion led into snares, kiting, NPC fleeing, all of those kinds of things. He wants to make snare more used in the game. Right now, snare is very not used because it's just like, the wizard has like a 60% snare, but it's on a 1 minute cooldown. Some of the other snares in the game, like the caltrops, just don't last long enough. And once they get out of the caltrops, obviously. Things like that. He wants to be able to actually do that. Part of that discussion turned into kiting, and people were like, well, you're going to take away the ability to kite. And he said, no, he wants the ability to kite. He wants you to be able to express yourself with your skill and be able to do kiting and all of that kind of stuff. That is part of the game. So that hopefully will stay, but he does want to adjust the snaring, and that will probably affect kiting, so hopefully we can still be able to do what we want to do. That also brought up the NPC fleeing, and right now he doesn't like the way that NPCs flee in the game. He thinks that they flee at too low of health, so he might extend that amount. I think they're okay around the 20% mark, which seems to be about when they start to flee. Right now, in the current iteration, most mobs don't flee in the game, which I think is a bug and another reason it was brought up during the chat. But then also he wants NPCs to flee for a specific reason and go to a specific place. Right now, they just kind of flee and run into walls. These, he wants to update that so that they flee and try to run for help, which would enforce or force the player to have to stop them rather than the mob just kind of aimlessly running into a wall and getting beaten on. You would need to then snare the mob or root the mob or something along those lines. Hopefully when they do that, they remove the inability to snare or root named mobs that are fleeing. It seems to me that any mob that starts to flee, any named mob that starts to flee in this game is completely immune to CC at this point. So hopefully they change that later. But anyway, the idea is that we're going to need to have somebody to snare or root or somehow CC that mob temporarily while it runs. And then also as it gets lower in health, it slows them down. At this point right now, you've probably seen it in my stream, when a mob starts to flee, it goes at a crazy speed. We mentioned Captain America a minute ago. Now we're going to mention Flash. Takes off, dude. It's nuts. I've had it kill me multiple times because of them doing that. Moving on, we got the Invigorate change. This is a huge change for clerics. Again, this is part of the patch notes, but I kind of wanted to draw to it here because Invigorate it was such a terrible spell. It still is right now, but later on today, we're going to be getting the patch. It is a much more useful spell. It gives you a burst of endurance, and then it gives you a regen of endurance very quickly for like 6 seconds, I think is what it is. Epic style abilities for classes. So he briefly mentioned this around the 1 hour, 53-minute mark, where certain classes are going to get very epic style abilities. He mentioned something called like the Celestial Aegis or something along those lines for the Cleric. This would be a wall, like a celestial wall that clerics can place down, and enemies would have to break through it to get to the players. I personally see a lot of trolling happening here, assuming that players can't run through it and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, I could see this, how it could cause trolling, but these are the types of abilities that he wants to put in the game, which would be really cool to see, and hopefully we see some really neat abilities for other classes going forward. At the hour 58-minute mark, he mentioned the max AC that they are looking at for max level characters currently, which is going to be 400 AC, which would be a 40% damage reduction because it is out of 1,000. So that would be really nice. I don't know how they're going to adjust that in the future. That is another concern that I have, but that has not been talked about because if we get, expansions and you get better gear and you keep, it's just going to keep going up. So if you keep getting closer to that 1,000 mark, we're going to just get closer and closer to 100% damage mitigation without any type of counter to that. So I don't know how they're planning on dealing with that in the future. There is a new spell for clerics. It's called Signet of the Coursera. This, again, is going to be it's not in the patch notes, actually, but I think it is coming in with the patch today. That is going to be a 10% boost to all stats. Chat went kind of crazy when this happened, and they talked about, oh, that's overpowered. Some people were saying it's overpowered. Some people were saying, no, that's right in tune. I personally feel like it's about right because overall, if you get 10% to all of your stats, you're going to gain approximately 12 total stat points, and a shaman is able to actually add 10 to 12 stat points to a single ability. So now a cleric will be able to add 10 stat points across maybe the entirety of all your stats. The thing is with that, though, is like certain stats, charisma, wisdom, intellect, these are not even used by me. So a +1 to each of those stats will literally do nothing. So I'm only really getting a bonus to these other stats. So I'd get, 3, 2, 2, 1 here and 1 here. So it's really not a huge boost. But, anyway, that's where it's going to be. So he's looking at that. 2 hour, 8-minute mark, there is a charm test. So he literally showed that charm is in the game. They are working on it. He charmed a spider and he had the spider fight another spider, but then he showed where some of the issues are, and that's basically when if you were to die and the charmed spider would continue to attack the other spider, and they want to try to fix some of those things. There's other issues as well. They continued the enchanter discussion for a while after that, which led into the melee attack speed versus casting attack speed. There was a whole long discussion about this. This basically lasted for almost the entirety of the rest of the stream, from the 2 hour, 28-minute mark all the way through to when the stream ended at the about 3 hour mark. So basically, the long and short of this is attack speed is very, very good. It increases your readiness generation. It just basically increases the DPS of casters. Joppa was under the impression that spell cast speed would increase your heal over times and your damage over time abilities, the ticks between them. It does not do that. He found that out during the stream when he was doing some testing. So they're going to be looking at that in the future. So you dot people and you hot people, rejoice over that, because that could be amazing for you if they actually allow you to tick those dots faster, and it isn't just your cast speed. He did say that currently cast speed and haste and those things are really good on a cleric, and they are. So I agree with him on that. But when it comes to the enchanter has a spell haste spell that they can put on a spellcaster, and it really doesn't benefit them a whole lot. They continue this discussion that enchanters are just kind of undervalued and underused, and they don't really have the abilities that they need. Chat was basically saying that CC is just not needed as much. It easily is broken. There's too many things like Iron Will. All of these things were going on in chat. So basically the idea is that enchanter needs some love very, very badly, and he was kind of looking over a lot of that. One of the ideas that came up was having an illusion to affect mobs like the Iron Will mobs. So right now, Iron Will mobs, you cannot mez. With the new patch coming in today, you're going to be able to knock them down. So there is some changes coming from that, but the idea is to get enchanters to be able to cast an illusion on the enchant or the Iron Will mob and effectively make them fight with an illusion of themselves, which effectively is like a mez, but it doesn't just stop them from doing things. And then also he talked about a mass mez ability, which would basically you target 3 different mobs and you highlight them, and then you cast one spell and it mezzes all of them at once. So that's another thing that he talked about. He also mentioned very briefly, and people kind of were like, whoa, yeah, let's have that, which is the loadout preset. So preset loadout that you can have. This would be especially useful for buffing classes and like shaman. But basically being able to go click button, here's your loadout of spells, click button, here's another loadout of spells. You will not be able to do this in combat, obviously. It'll be during downtime. He didn't mention if it was going to be like a long cast to do it or if it was going to be instant or anything like that, but that is an idea coming in the future. Also, the last thing we're going to talk about here is the full robe that he did show. If you want to see that actually on his stream, you can go to it around the 2-hour 58-minute mark, or you can sit here and you can see it right here. This is the robe right here, the idea. So this is the full robe that he's been talking about for a while. But that is it. So if you're interested, in playing a spellcaster, but you don't like the way they look, this will be coming soon. Anyway, that is it for the Joppa summary for today. We will be going over the patch notes as well, probably during the stream, maybe during the patch. I don't really know. So yeah, that's going to be it. Bye.